Hi everyone, it's Kate from Sleep Time Baby. We are live again today for day number 3 of the 5-day sleep challenge. So today is kind of a big subject. It's going to be about night wakings. So we've talked about sleep education, we've talked about kind of the environment at bedtime, and we are now going to talk about night wakings. But firstly, just a little kind of notice point, because I've had a few kind of messages come in about the work that I do. So the idea of this challenge is to help you out by giving you the information that you need to make the changes and identify kind of the issues that you've got. But if you need kind of more one-on-one support, then that's what I can kind of offer. I have like troubleshooting calls, I have bespoke consultations. I am nearly about to launch an online course. It's not quite ready yet, but that can be there to help you. So there are loads of ways of which I can help you even further. And basically, I try and make sure that there's a kind of a budget for everyone. So bear that in mind if you're looking for a bit more kind of help, so I can help you more. But night wakings, right, so massive topic. And actually, at the weekend, I went to the Holistic Sleep Conference, and one of the big things I took away from that is that I knew this anyway, but what they reinforced is that there's no real normal amount of time that a child should wake in the night. It's really down to the child and your kind of expectations around it, and that's everything that I'm trying to tell you. This is your journey. This is not me telling you what happens. It's about what's right for you. So I have to give you the facts of sorts, but basically, the theory book would start to talk about a child of around about 6 months and about 16 pounds is capable of doing longer stretches of sleep. That you can interpret to what you need. So to put that into context for me, I never ask a parent to get a child under the age of 9 months. We don't aim for sleeping through the night because it's not really necessarily feasible. There are so many other things that's going on. And actually, I sort of have that conversation and go, what do you want to achieve? Do you want to, kind of get longer periods of sleep, or do you want to get your child to sleep through the night? And we decide to work on it from there. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. If you've got an older child and you know that they're capable of doing it, then you know you can push them. But I suppose what I'm saying is that sleeping through the night means different things to different people. And actually, a child never really sleeps through the night because they wake up through their sleep cycles. So be conscious of kind of that as well. So sleeping through the night is a possible thing, but not from day one. You might be lucky, you might have more issues, but bear in mind kind of what your parameters are. So in terms of kind of what you can do to kind of help with that, my gut feeling is that you need to set up the right environment, which is why we talked about bedtime. You want to make sure your daytime is in the right kind of zone. So that's why tomorrow we'll talk about naps and how important they are. So the overtiredness things comes into play there. And for me, I think that often when you look at trying to identify your issues, so when I've been asking you about what your sleep prop is, and we were talking about those on Monday, then perhaps it's that prop that's causing them to wake in the night rather than anything else. So that comes back to self-settling, which again we spoke about yesterday in terms of what that kind of means and how that kind of works, and we may well revisit it again. So it's your journey and it's about your kind of approach to night wakings, but you need to have your sort of parameters and what that might mean. So do you think your child should be sleeping through the night? Or do you think that they are of an age whereby they may need some nutrition in the night time, so therefore you're accepting of them kind of waking? A lot of kind of 6 to 9 month old kids that I work with, we aim just to cut down to 1 feed a night, and then we see where we go from there. So in terms of the night wakings and what they actually look like, it's important to kind of think about the potential causes for the waking. So I'm going to split that down into a couple of areas. So initially, if you've got a child that wakes very soon after going down for bed, so I'm talking about you get them to go down to sleep and it's like 7 o'clock and they're up around sort of 8, 9 o'clock, then it's probably not going to be a feed scenario type going on, but maybe there are a couple of other things. So firstly, it could be wind, so make sure you're winding your child loads before bedtime, getting that out of the system so it doesn't gurgle around. That can really kind of cause problems. And secondly, that's often a sign of overtiredness because their cortisol in their bloodstream, so their kind of baby Red Bull, which has built up over time, hasn't allowed them to kind of settle well, so therefore they're up. So those first few hours in the night should be the deeper part of sleep, so they should be harder to rouse. So if you find that your child is waking before midnight, then it's possibly to do with something along those lines, possibly because we could be other kind of factors included as well. If you've got a tiny one, then obviously you need to be thinking about whether it's a kind of a feed situation that might need to happen, but you kind of have to think that through. So from a kind of a later waking point of view, so by this I kind of mean perhaps after sort of midnight maybe, then at that point you're looking at the sort of the lighter stages of sleep. So actually it's much easier for them to be kind of roused out of that their sleep, because their lighter stages of sleep are easier to come out on, and if they've relied on something to get to sleep, then maybe they're waking because of that. So it does kind of come back to sort of self-settling again, but also you can link that with overtiredness as well. I keep talking a lot about overtiredness this time around, so it's actually really vital that you eliminate that from the possibility. So when you kind of are looking at your wakings and how to handle them, if you've got a child under the age of about 1 and you're thinking about what the night feeds look like, let's take it to an extreme example. Your child is waking 5 or 6 times a night and you're feeding them back to sleep each time, then what you want to be doing is thinking about it and kind of what's real. So let's say that they feed during the day, they feed every 3 hours, something along those lines. Again, your child, your journey, and each night they're waking up every 2 hours. So it's not kind of following the path of what's happening in the day, and you'd like it to stretch out longer. The best thing to do is to try and work out what's going on with the self-settling, and if you think that might be causing a problem, looking at addressing that in the kind of the night time. So by that I mean, if you've got kind of maybe a feeding to sleep situation, you're feeding them sleep at bedtime, they're waking in the night, you're feeding them back to sleep, and then they're waking more frequently. The biggest thing to kind of change from that situation is to try and remove that feeding to sleep at bedtime ideally, but also in the night time as well. And you can start to do that by doing things like putting them down drowsy but awake, and then trying to put them down a bit more awake, but trying not to feed them back to sleep. I know it's tough because they're often very sleepy, but if you can do that, you can really eliminate some of those wakings, so you don't feel the necessary need to feed them. It's more that actually they're not waking. So that's the kind of big tip I'd say when you're kind of got a little one that's waking in the night and you're feeding them a lot, is try not to feed them to sleep. Whether it's breastfeeding, whether it's bottle feeding, the kind of situation stays the same. So think about that from a kind of a feeding point of view. And once you've kind of got into that stage whereby you're thinking about dropping those feeds, think about it from a wean down point of view as well. So there's 2 ways of looking at it. You kind of go, okay, let's address the self-settling at bedtime if that's the problem you've got going on, and hopefully that will stop the waking, so it will make the wakings less frequently, so it will just happen naturally. That's the very sort of, I suppose, gentle way of going about it. But then on the flip side of that, if you do need to kind of change things and make it so that you're reducing the feed, you're going to need to resettle your child and go through that process of doing that without feeding them to wean them off it. Often if you choose to do that, and that's classically kind of when people are trying to just drop that last feed, you might find that you need to do it for 3 nights and then it just goes. They get used to kind of not getting the feed, because these feeds can become slightly habitual in nature if they're not necessary from a nutritional point of view. So making sure you're putting them down awake and then kind of not feeding them back to sleep should help with the frequency of the wakings. So that's kind of younger children. From an older children point of view, if they're in a bed, and I wouldn't recommend putting them in a bed until they're 2.5, because they just can't understand the freedom. If your older child is in a bed and they just come and find you, then unfortunately the only answer I've got for you really is to take them back. Now, try and think about why they're waking. So again, are they settling at night time with a parent in the room? Have they got kind of a dummy going on? Do they need a lot of comfort? What are the things that could be waking? Remove that, and then hopefully what you'll see is that helps with the wakings in the night. May not stop them, but it might help them to wake for less amount of time. So what you want to do is make sure you're consistent with your approach, take them back to the room, tell them that this is not the time for being awake, and then leave the room, potentially stay with them, and then get them to kind of resettle. Now in the morning, if they're old enough, you can talk about it. You could give them that kind of whole kind of chat about what happened. We don't want to make a big deal about it, but make sure that they kind of understand what's happened through the night. So with an older child, you want to kind of make sure you've got boundary lines. So a quick note about kind of co-sleeping, because often that happens quite a lot in the night. Now, I personally co-slept a little bit with my youngest child, but only when he was small, and we did it in all the safe guidelines. But I know that co-sleeping happens quite a lot. Firstly, you need to make sure you're doing it safely. The Lullaby Trust are doing a great campaign on that this week, as I mentioned. And secondly, you kind of want to know whether that's the right thing that's going to help you improve your sleep, if that's the journey you're going on. So with a co-sleeping kind of situation, if you're relying on that to get some sleep, but you want to change it, you're going to have to go through that sort of barrier of doing it. If you've got an older child that kind of climbs into bed, you're going to have to take them back to sleep in their own bed. If you've got a younger child and you're bringing them in just to settle them, you need to kind of make that decision about what message that's sending and where you actually want them to sleep in the night. You want to set out with the view of, okay, I am going to start my night with them settling in the cot, and when they wake, I'm going to resettle them and they're going to sleep in the cot the whole night through, or they're going to stay in their bed the whole night through. Important to have in your mind what your boundary lines are and kind of stick to them. So in terms of a couple of golden rules for me, in terms of what you can actually look at from a night waking point of view, the first thing to do is not to rush too quickly to your child. If you can wait at least a couple of minutes, it will break an association with I call out and I get someone running to me. You can wait as long as you want to, personally. You just need to kind of find that time. But if you can wait just a little bit of time, it will help show them that this is not a time to be kind of wakeful. And what you can start to see is once you work on perhaps the issues that you've been having at bedtime and settling, then they start to resettle themselves in that time that you've been waiting. So you don't need to go in and settle them yourself. That's a kind of a really kind of key tip. The second one is all about staying consistent. So if you choose an approach, stick with it. Don't vary from it, because it's really vital that you show them that that's kind of what's going to be happening from now onwards. Consistency is a really key thing. Now, the last thing to talk about is white noise. White noise is brilliant for kind of helping children stay asleep. Keep it on the whole time. Use it up to whatever age you like. It's not something they'll get addicted to. It's not a sleep prop, and it can be really helpful. Turn it on as part of your bedtime routine. Get them to settle and keep it on. Don't kind of have something that goes on and off. Don't have a reactive version. Keep the white noise on. You can use like a white noise machine. You can use an untuned radio, something like an app or something along those lines. And that's what the prize is today. You can win a Marpack Hush white noise machine. So I'll be posting about that later. So keep an eye out for that one. Now, the last thing to talk about today in terms of just a kind of an issue, which I was going to talk about on Friday, but I'm going to bring up now, is nightmares and night terrors. A lot of children will kind of suffer from those, and they are varying in their kind of disturbances. So a nightmare will always happen at the later stage of the night, so from sort of like 2 o'clock onwards, and they're much more of a conscious thing. It happens when we're more of a dreamlike state, so in the lighter sleep stages of the morning. The thing to do with nightmares is try and work out what's happening. Is it the fact that the child has got some worries going on? It's normally in older children you see this. Can you talk about it? Can you get them to write it down? A little technique I was learning about the weekend was writing down the nightmare if it's a reoccurring one, and then changing the ending. And actually, if you can get the child to accept that there's a positive thing to it, then actually they can improve the nightmares. Night terrors is more of a sleep disorder, and they happen in the first half of the night. So to deal with the night terror can be a bit scary because your child isn't necessarily conscious. They seem to be kind of thrashing out. They can be quite vocal. The advice is not to interrupt them, is to just sit with them and stay calm through it all and help them to be safe, basically. So what you want to do is stay with them until it's over. And then they won't remember it in the morning, so you can determine it from that. And what you want to do is look at kind of what's happening. So a night terror can be caused because they're too warm. It can also be caused from overtiredness, there's that word again. And then lastly, it can be caused because they've got a full bladder. So think about how you can maybe help them with those situations, and hopefully then over time they'll adjust so that they don't kind of suffer with the night terrors even further. So that's it for today. A bit of a kind of a walk through Nightwakings. Hopefully that was helpful. I'll be sending that out via the various channels on the email. I'll be posting about the prize later, and tomorrow we'll be back to talk about daytime, because it all works and it's all kind of important to consider it all. So have a lovely windy afternoon, and I will speak to you soon. Take care. Bye bye.